This is part 2 of my conversation with Andrew, the expert on pre-war vehicles and trucks. I recommend going back and listening to the first part before listening to this one. Out of everything in the car industry, what is it about pre-war stuff that you personally find so interesting?
Well, I think the main thing I find interesting about pre-war vehicles is that the simplicity, but also the complexity of them is really intriguing. Like something like Stanley Steamer. It is a unique concept. It's totally different than whatever we have now. It's like it's a steam car because there were so many different concepts. There were so many different directions that cars could have gone, where you have all these different vehicles that could have happened. You have all of the different stuff that did or didn't catch on. You have electric cars, even early electrical cars. Like, you know, forget exactly which company built them, but you have something that looks like if it looks like an antique Tesla, which doesn't exist, but it looks like, I mean, if Tesla had been around for 100 years, that's what it would look like. And that's the intriguing thing, is that there were so many different like possibilities for the car industry, and there were so many different, just it was very elegant time for design, for construction, for just simplicity. You have the Model T, but you've also got incredibly complex cars like the first Bentleys, the first Maseratis, just the first cars that were really luxury cars, and the first cars that were consumer cars. And you've got just the in betweens, and early cars where you have a stagecoach company that's trying to build a new vehicle. Like, because, for example, the first electric car, or the first electric cars, one of them was built by a stagecoach company. You had it was a stagecoach with an electric motor on it. You would sit on the front of the stagecoach where the driver of a stagecoach would sit and drive the car from there. So you could have a driver that would just be sitting on top of the vehicle driving it, and then you're just talking with all your rich friends inside your quiet electric car. And that's just the interesting thing about it, is there were so many innovators, and it was very grassroots. You could enter it with a barn, a couple tools, and an apprenticeship. It's not like now where I don't even want to think about the amount of paperwork and resources and money you need. Like, but that's just the fun thing about it, is how grassroots it was.
Do you have a favorite racing series?
Well, I think it probably NASCAR, but specifically about, like, I love stock car racing, because you're taking something that was never meant to race, or maybe was if you're Richard Petty and you have a Plymouth Superbird. But you're taking something that was never really meant to be a racing vehicle, at least before Gen 4 and Gen 3 NASCAR. You were taking something never meant to be a racing vehicle and turning it into a race car. You're pushing it to its limits. You're testing it, and you're really pushing reliability to the edge, and you're challenging manufacturers. Build a passenger car that can go 500 miles an hour that can go, not 500 miles an hour, that can go 200 miles an hour for 500 miles. Build something that can withstand Daytona. Build a Chevelle that can take it. Or you have people like Smokey Yunick, who did all this modification. Like, he built a Chevelle once that had, like, it had a fuel line that held like 5 gallons of gas. He actually, one of my favorite stories about Smokey Yunick, he was looking at this Chevelle, and they had found like 11 violations on it, something like that. He'd shifted the car to the left on the frame. Like he'd actually moved it over an inch so it would turn left better. He made a fuel tank bigger than normal. He did all this stuff. And they actually took the fuel tank out to measure the volume in the fuel tank. And they told him, hey, you have 11 violations on this car. He said, make that, or no, they said, you have 10 violations on this car. He said, make that 11, and he drove away without a fuel tank in the car. He didn't have a fuel tank. He just drove off because of the fuel. It's like, just like the stories, you know, it just came about out of moonshiners racing. And like, I'm from Appalachia. I'm from, you know, Virginia. I have family who, like my great grandfather, he was once handed a revolver and told to guard a still. Right? Or my great grandfather, anyway. But it was a really interesting thing because, like, when Prohibition ended in the 30s, what are they going to do with these cars? It's the Great Depression. You've got this really, really, really fast car, and you got nothing to do with it because the illegal liquor you were bootlegging is now totally legal, and there's nothing you can really do in Appalachia because you've spent your entire life living on the other side of the law. So what are you going to do? You know, they start racing these cars around, and they start it just starts out of a bunch of guys, just, and some girls too, just deciding, you know what, let's pool our money, give it to whoever wins, and have a bunch of fun. You know, take on this whole horse racing track nobody's using and just have at it, you know? It's like another one of my favorite stories about like NASCAR, if you don't mind me rambling a bit, is like you have, I forget exactly what her name was, but this lady, she wanted to be a NASCAR driver. So what she did, she registered herself, she got a number, she got a can of paint, she painted it on the side of her family's like Volkswagen, right? Her family's Chrysler. She took it to the racetrack the next day. It's essentially the equivalent of today if I entered myself into NASCAR, took my parents' car, and just decided to start racing. Like it was this bare stock, just bare car. There was no racing tires, no racing engine, the headlights were still on it, no roll cage, no nothing. It was just racing. It was pure racing, you know, and that's the cool thing about it.
Trucks have existed since before World War One. How do you think their purpose has evolved over time?
Well, the first trucks were very simple. You know, it evolved from different terms. You know, I mean, in England, they still call railroad cars trucks. If you ever watch Thomas, they call them trucks. But it's changed because, you know, your very first trucks were like your Model Ts. And they had the Model T, which was a passenger car. Then you had the Model TT, which was a truck because it was the Model T truck. That was it. It was just a Model T with a truck bed on it. It was the same frame, same engine, but it was different, you know. And a lot of your first trucks, they come from the role of simple carrying cargo from your railroad depot to houses. You're carrying stuff very short distances, and you're ferrying things over shorter routes locally where the railroads don't go, because the railroads were king, and they have been king for a while. They were dethroned in like the 1950s, but they're coming back even now over road freight. You know, you have going into the 30s, you have your first semi trucks. You know, you've got the first highways across the United States, and it really starts with roads, with your first real highways. All of a sudden, you've got a route that won't take you a week, and you probably will come out without anything sprained, broken, motion sickness, or any number of broken tires, broken anything. You know, a lot less potholes and a lot less just like, I think the road is here, but I don't know, so I'm going to go this way. You know, it stops being to where most of driving is off-roading and it starts actually having paved roads. You start getting your highways, your simple 1 to 2 lane gravel highways change the game. And in the 1930s, you've got your first semi trucks. You know, they aren't very viable. They're very slow. They're not great. And the sleeper arrangements for drivers are not fun either. A lot of them have sleeping in your trailer, for example. You know, that changes. And World War II is the big changer because you have Germany has the Autobahn and they've redefined military logistics. They use a lot of trucks. And the United States, especially, too. They come in with something like the GMC CCKW or the Dodge. The Dodge, what's it called? The Dodge WC, or just trucks that were designed to carry your troops, carry your ammunition. You know, you've got that. And they develop new suspension for the trucks. They develop engines. You know, your first 2-stroke Detroit diesel engines were developed for tanks. They were developed for boats. But they were smaller because you finally had the tolerance to build a diesel engine that could fit in a truck. Going into the 50s, you take advantage of all these new, amazing, you know, just all this amazing technology with your new suspension and stuff. And you've got companies like Mack and Brockway and White and Peterbilt. Peterbilt starts up too. You know, they build these new trucks, especially using engines from companies like Cummins, which built insanely reliable engines, and companies like Detroit Diesel, which was owned by GM, which put engines in every GM truck, every GM train, because GM built trains too. You know, GM put diesels, they were the 2-stroke kings of diesel engines. You have your trucks that were starting to become something that were viable over a long distance. They were reliable. You could drive them for a longer time. They were, I wouldn't say they were very comfortable. A lot of the first sleeper cabs, you know, Mack had a cab where it was under the dashboard, whereas where your sleeper was. Then a lot of earlier trucks, they had a little compartment in front of your trailer. The only issue is if you were sleeping in that and your partner was driving the truck, if they jackknifed the truck, you're where the jackknife is. So it's kind of the trade-off of, do I trust my buddy not to crash? Or do I just not sleep? And, you know, it starts to go into your first driver regulations where hours and stuff. But a big thing that happens is trucking is deregulated. The U.S. government had required that truckers have to clear, the companies have to clear each individual route with the government. And only one company could go on each route. And it was very slow process. Then they deregulate the industry totally. All of a sudden, it's not that you can only route from your depot in Spokane to your depot in Charlotte. It is, oh, you need something? I'll bring it to you. Oh, you need something? I'll bring it to you. And you start having an explosion in freight because these trucks and the new interstate highways, all of a sudden, your railroads start to lose making sense a little bit because why ship something on the railroad if you don't have railroad access? Like, what do? Well, just use a truck because it's the same amount as a railroad car, almost, a box car. And you get it to the destination, potentially quicker, and it goes directly to the destination. There's no need to contact someone or own a truck to take it from the railroad depot or hire the railroad to truck it from the depot to your facility. And it makes off the railroad industry viable in places that don't have railroad access. So all of a sudden you have all kinds of places that can open up in different areas. And that just changes commerce to where you've got just a ton of different models of vehicle and a ton of different, just everything. And then, I mean, segueing into the 60s, you actually start to see really like trucker culture developing too. You've got music, you've got movies, especially starting in the 70s, movies, like Convoy, White Line Fever, Smokey and the Bandit, my favorite movie. You've just got, it changes up a little bit how truckers are perceived in culture. It changes how, it changes a lot of people adopt the cowboy trucker personality, for example, the Burt Reynolds, the bandit, and you just start to see bigger vehicles, bigger trucks, more powerful trucks. I mean, by the 1980s, you had trucks being manufactured with, as a standard power option, the 12V71 and, the 12V71, which for the Detroit, the 12V71 is a 12-cylinder. It's a V12, but each cylinder is 71 cubic inches. So that is like more than 8 liters. You've got a liter per cylinder, essentially. So you've got a piston the size of this cup. It's massive. You've got all this power available, and you start to see it coming into emergency services. You see just all kinds of newer vehicles that pushing innovation, because cargo is starting to move off the railroads, because you don't need a railroad anymore with the interstates. You don't need to build along a railroad track. You don't need to do anything. And even air freight, like, it doesn't make any more sense than railroad freight, because what are you going to do? Land a plane at your factory? You still have to have trucks in between. And the trucks are kind of the thing that connects society today. You see them, you see them everywhere. They're ubiquitous of modern life. They are all shapes, all sizes. You've got them for all roles. You've got trucks meant to ferry around people for jobs. You've got work trucks. You've got cargo vehicles. You've got military trucks, emergency vehicles, and you've got trucks. You've even got trucks for showing off your money, showing off how much money you have. You've got all kinds of trucks. It covers all the bases, You've got trucks for your ego. You've got trucks for work. You've got trucks for cargo,
How do you think the invention of the early differentials changed the auto industry?
Ooh, so differentials changed a lot, it changed how cars could be performance-wise, especially because before, a lot of cars, you could have the true rear-driven wheels on a single thing, but it's about like driving with a welded rear diff all the time. It doesn't help with performance, and especially on a car with 30 horsepower, the things that feel minuscule now on a car, like whenever you're with a welded diff, if you have 200, 300 horsepower, it doesn't make as much of a difference. But if you're driving something that is 4-cylinder, it's got 30 horsepower, it makes a lot of difference to be able to not just have more than one driven wheel, which, if your one driven wheel loses traction, then you have no traction on the other 3 wheels. You've got the ability to have, that 2 different powered wheels at all times, and you've got the ability to have the variable speed on each wheel, which cornering, it changes your cornering performance on racing vehicles. It changes how fast cars can go, and it changes safety too, because turning is easier, turning is more safe. I think, and I'm not aware if most 4-wheelers have a differential, but I know I drive a 4-wheeler that it's incredibly hard to turn. Driving something with a rear differential that doesn't work, without power steering, 2 driven rear wheels, and it doesn't change speed, you're working against your own engine to turn. So unless you want to stop, turn your wheel all the way around, and just gently press on the gas, probably not moving at all. I mean, it essentially stops you from turning. It just doesn't really, it changes how cars are able to move. It changes just all kinds of stuff, you know?
Now, you've told me the story of the first fire truck before, but for people who haven't,
Yes. So the very first fire trucks were simple, right? And it really starts with the invention of steam pumpers back in 1870s, right? 1850s, really, closer to that. You've got steam, and they're carried by horses. They're pulled by horses. Obviously, that's a great solution for the 1850s, but, and it's definitely an upgrade over 15 men pulling a hose cart with a hand pump on it as fast as they can. But it's not, it's still, it relies on horses. If you spook the horse, no more fire response. And you've got to maintain a horse at your fire station. So it kind of, the inventions of the first real self-mobile fire apparatus was built, I think it was built by American LaFrance. They built a steam pumper that was self-mobile. Basically, it just used its own steam to drive. What that did was it was great. It was a steam truck, right? Problem, by the time you're at the fire scene, you're out of steam. So there's no steam for pumping the water. So going on later into the 1900s, American LaFrance develops and it wasn't called American LaFrance mostly at this point. Like, it changed names a lot. There were a lot of different companies involved. But you develop your first real motorized fire apparatus, which was a gasoline engine driving a truck with a steam pumper on it. Because they hadn't really thought of, why don't we just make the pumps gas? They just figured they'd keep the steam, I guess. And you had those. And then, starting in like early 1900s, the first fully motorized fire department was Detroit Fire Department. You started getting your actual fire trucks from companies like American LaFrance, Seagrave. They started as a ladder company. They started building trucks. And then you have a company called Aaron's Fox, which was really known for its insanely high grade fire apparatus. You started to have your conversions of fire trucks from like a Model T. You would get, they called them a chemical. They called them chemical wagons. What they would do is you had a Model T body, right? Or any other body, but mainly Model Ts. And you had hose, you had a ladder, maybe a ladder. Not always a ladder, but maybe. And you had a tank of water, which it had a chemical propellant in another tank. And it would basically charge your water tank with air pressure and use that to pump your water instead of having a pump on your truck. And you couldn't get a ton of GPM from it. Like, you couldn't get anything close to what modern fire trucks can do. But it was a lot better than the alternative at the time, which was a guy's house burning down.
I like to ask this question to all of my guests. If you could have any car, what would it be, and would you change it?
Okay. Any vehicle, any car. Right now, I would say I would like to have a 1977 Firebird Trans Am, but I would like to swap in a Chevy big block from the 60s. Like a 450 kind of big block. Something big. I think that would be my dream vehicle right now.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Andrew.
I'm glad to be on the podcast, man.
Yeah. This has been the Exhaust Note Podcast. I'm Brynn Patton, and that is Andrew. We'll see you later.